What is going on, YouTube? It is the Dual Threat Podcast here, your daily news source for all things sports. My name is Drew. This is Jacob here. We've got the over-under reactions. Let's get straight into the video. So those unfamiliar with this, Jacob, why don't you go ahead and explain what's kind of going on here?
Sure, yeah. Over under reactions, not necessarily over or underrated, but it just how is the media perceiving these events? Are they reacting too much, or are there some things that they should be talking about more that they're not? That's kind of the vibe. Drew, you want to kick us off with your first team?
Yeah, so my first overreaction, I'm going to start with the over here, is I believe personally, we have been hyping them up a lot in the channel recently. So don't come at me just yet. Hear me out here. I believe Texas's offense is being a little bit overrated after this past weekend. Now, look, I'm not saying at all that Texas doesn't look great, especially offensively. They look like a better team. I mean, and this is just undoubtedly with Quinn Ewers behind center. I think everybody in the country knows that. Now, this is where I kind of drift off from the media. The FPI, that's the Football Power Index provided by ESPN, they have them ranked number 4 now. They actually moved up 3 spots. This is where I kind of fall off that cliff there. They are ranking them that high because they believe their offense is just as power rated as Ohio State's, and this is where I just completely disagree. Now, Texas's offense is phenomenal. I will give them that, but they are not Ohio State level. This past weekend, stats were just a little bit skewed, and I'm just going to go to the bulletin board here to kind of explain why. So let's get over to there. So right here, as you can see, Texas won 49-0. This is the biggest, blowout in Red River rivalry history. So you got to give it to them. I mean, they played very good, but you have to look at the other side of the ball as well. Oklahoma had 39 total passing yards. Now, look, I'm not saying Texas is bad defensively whatsoever, but there's no way that overnight they became the next Georgia. 39 passing yards, and there's completely good reasoning for Oklahoma's lack of passing, and that's because they had to play without Dylan Gabriel this weekend. They played Davis Beville, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He only threw it 12 times. His wide receivers almost threw it as much as he did with 5 attempts and 3 completions. They had half as many completions as he did. It was very obvious going into the game after the first few possessions that Oklahoma held that their game plan was to basically run the ball and hope for Texas to make mistakes on offense, or maybe just to get past that defensive line on Texas, which has been successful in the past, but you have to be able to pass to run. And so if you look at this, I mean, it's very skewed in the fact that Texas got probably 8 or 9 more possessions against Oklahoma than what any other team in the country would if they were playing against Oklahoma's starters. And I'm not necessarily trying to take all the credit away from Texas's defense. Yes, they played great. Shutting out anybody is always really good in college football. But to throw a backup in there after only 1 week of playing with the ones in Oklahoma's probably weakest position after their first string. And, I mean, you have 8 total punts from Oklahoma as opposed to Texas's 3. Give credit to Texas's offense there, though. They did score a lot of points on Oklahoma and, didn't have to punt a lot. But there were 8 punts. There were, I believe, 2 or 3 turnovers on Oklahoma's end. And they only got 11 first downs. I mean, they went 3 for 15 on third down. And if you watch this game, I believe their average on third down was like 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, because they kept trying to run the ball up the middle and they would get no yards. And, I mean, when you're averaging 3.3 yards per play through an entire game, you're not going to score very much. And so this is my concern with all of the hype for Texas's offense, because if you look at the past 3 games, Oklahoma's starter, Dylan Gabriel, played in the other 2 games, and each of those Big 12 teams scored 40 points or more. And this is a game that you're saying Oklahoma is getting way less first downs because they're playing their backup. And so you kind of have to just sit back and think, if TCU was able to score 55 when Oklahoma got, twice as many first downs, and does that really make Texas's offense that much better? The time of possession was about equal in this game, but that's because you could argue Texas just absolutely dominated and scored really quickly. And so Oklahoma tried to run the clock out, tried to keep the score low. And so this is kind of where I'm saying the media is overreacting to Texas. Jacob, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the regular board, and why don't you give us your first team here?
Cool. Yeah. I think I'm gonna go to the SEC and talk about my underreaction is Mississippi State. Mississippi State, they're ranked 16, up 7 spots, which is a decent amount, but they're a one-loss team, and they're sitting up here behind NC State and Wake Forest and Oregon as the other one-loss teams, and they just dominated Arkansas. I mean, this was an Arkansas team that 3 weeks ago we were saying, can they compete for the West? Can they win maybe the SEC in general? And now we're acting like a 23-point win is nothing over them. Granted, KJ Jefferson didn't play, but their identity's in the run game anyway. This is a Mississippi State is a very, very solid team. They had one bad loss to LSU, which you never want to see. It was at LSU, a hard place to play. Listen, I think we're not talking about Mississippi State enough, and I think they're going to show that against Kentucky this weekend. Kentucky is a really good team. They kind of had a bad week last week because their starting quarterback didn't play, but I think Mississippi State in these next couple weeks against Kentucky and Alabama, and then Auburn and then Georgia. I mean, and then they have Ole Miss at the end of the season. They got a hard schedule, and they're going to show that they're better than number 16, whether it's playing Alabama and Georgia really close and beating the other two, or maybe pulling off a crazy upset against one of those teams. They look really, really good. Will Rogers is a phenomenal quarterback. I was telling Drew, I kind of like him as a sleeper Heisman at the beginning of the season. Before, I mean, you think about it, the last Heisman have all been, going back to Lamar Jackson, I think, have all been in the college football playoff, and I didn't expect that they would be there, but just purely based on talent and numbers he's going to put up, he should be in the conversation. The dude's an animal. So yeah, I think we're underreacting to Mississippi State a little bit. I think they're better maybe in like the 13 range, and then if they beat a couple ranked teams coming up, then maybe even move them up a little above that.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of you, just to talk about Mississippi State for a little bit. Their identity is strong on the passing game, and they actually showed a lot on the run game against Texas A&M. So they show the potential to do either way. And their loss against LSU can really be put on their fourth down conversions. I mean, they live or die by that. Leach likes to go for it everywhere on the field, and so I mean, if one or two fourth down conversions don't go their way, then it can really turn the ball game. And so that's where I would put that loss. But they are a very good team. I'm going to stick with the underreaction side, but I'm actually going to go to the Pac-12 here and talk about UCLA, a team that just absolutely thrashed Utah this past weekend. I mean, the score was a lot closer than it actually was, in my opinion. I got a few glimpses of that game. I was watching, the Texas A&M Alabama game once I saw that game was actually going to be close. But UCLA, they are undefeated right now, 6-0 with one ranked win over Utah, who is a good team. They had only dropped one to Florida before that. They were, the favorite at pretty much until last weekend to win their division of the Pac-12. And I mean, they may even still be. I'm not even sure at this point. But UCLA, not only do that's one of the games that they got out of the way to win their potential division, but they have a bye week this week, and then they go play Oregon. So they can even drop that game and still win their division as long as they beat USC, which they have at home. Granted, if you've watched UCLA, their home advantage is it's basically not even a home advantage. Like, nobody goes to their games. But this is a very solid team. Chip Kelly is doing really great there, and it's going to be interesting to see how they play against Oregon after a bye week. They're coming out with fresh legs against a pretty good Oregon team that's probably the favorite to win their division as well. So that's going to be a good game. And I'm saying it's underreaction because nobody's talking about them right now, and they're just very slowly under the radar, undefeated. I believe they're still ranked 18th or 19th at this point, something like that. I mean, they're pretty high, or at least in the teens. And so I'm saying they're under. Jacob, what about you?
Yeah, so I talked about Mississippi State playing Kentucky. I'm actually now going to flip over and talk about. I think the media is overreacting to Kentucky a little bit, dropping 9 spots in the AP poll. Obviously, I think they're overreacting just a little bit more than they should be. Kentucky, similar to how we were talking about Mississippi State, Kentucky has been, I mean, dominating and beating good teams. Beating Florida as, I guess, a good team. That was a crazy game. Florida versus Kentucky, both ranked pretty high. The, I mean, whatever way you look at it, should have beat Ole Miss. Their quarterback, Will Levis, his finger gets like dislocated 5 places in that game, and they still almost win. Still should have won. Last week he doesn't play, and they dropped to South Carolina, right? So that's where it all comes from. They dropped 9 spots after losing by 10 to South Carolina. But Will Levis is day to day. He's possible to play in the Mississippi State game, and if he does, I mean, that game could very realistically go either way. We're talking about 2 NFL talent level quarterbacks, and pretty similar team styles. And I think Mississippi State and Kentucky are going to match up really, really well if Will Levis plays. If he doesn't, Mississippi State's probably going to win that pretty easily. But yeah, I think we're reacting a little bit to a game where their starting quarterback didn't play. And I know you have to drop them because they lost and they have 2 losses. But they're the second 2-loss team ranked, as they probably should be. And we'll see kind of how they can get back to form when Levis gets back, whether it's this game or the next game against Tennessee or later in the season against Georgia, because I think with him, they can compete with any of those teams, if not beat any of those teams. And I think the drop from, what were they at the highest? They were like around 10 range, maybe a little lower than that. But this like 12 spot drop is just a little excessive, given that their starting quarterback hasn't played. I mean, Kansas lost without their starting quarterback and they haven't moved. Granted, we love Kansas on here, so I'm not knocking Kansas, but but yeah, so I think Kentucky's getting a little bit too much hate, and when they get back to full strength, they'll be back as a really, really solid team.
Yeah, so for my last team, I'm actually gonna, stay in that undefeated and nobody's talking about them range. We're gonna go with Syracuse here. They are currently 5-0. They're coming off a bye weekend. They are actually favorite. They are the favorite to win the game against NC State this weekend, a team ranked higher than them. This is a 15 versus 18 ranked matchup. They've got a brutal schedule for the next few weeks. They're playing NC State this week, who, like I said, they're favored against. Then they're playing Clemson. Then they play Notre Dame. I mean, this is just a crazy stretch here. And then, they finish off the season playing Florida State in a few weeks and at Wake Forest. Now, they get Notre Dame and NC State at home. Notre Dame's starting to look like a better team, coming off this big win against BYU. Clemson, they're looking somewhat beatable. I mean, they take Wake Forest took them to the wire. NC State, they kind of handled them a little bit better. But if Syracuse continues to play well like they have been, I mean, I don't see why they can't give Clemson at least a run for their money. They beat Louisville this year, which was probably looked at as a better win than it is now. Louisville hasn't been that great up to this point. They beat Virginia, they beat Purdue, and then they beat Wagner and Connecticut by a very large margin. But that's what good teams do. They beat bad teams soundly, and then they beat some better teams, and that they just keep winning. And so they're 5-0 right now. They are undefeated, favorites to play against NC State, and that's a big game for them this weekend. Potentially just depending on how bad they beat NC State. If they do beat them, they could be playing Clemson as a top 10 matchup. So I think that's an underrated team, not underrated, but underreacted to in the media. And so yeah, that's what I'm going to leave it with, Jacob.
That's it from me. Thank you everybody for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. It means a lot. We're up to little over 160 subscribers, closing in on 200. There may be a giveaway for 200. You'll have to wait and see. Everybody, thank you for watching. Make sure to fight with us in the comments. We like hearing your opinions, especially when they differ from ours. Because everybody has their own opinion. Drew, you got anything else?
Oh, just make sure to like the video, comment, subscribe. We love talking with y'all, getting other people's opinions. Thank y'all for tuning in. See y'all later.